Today on The State of Us, holiday shopping delays could be a problem, but an LA port's seeking to change that. Inflation is knocking. What can we do about it? Welcome to The State of Us. I'm your host, Justin T. Weller, joined, of course, by our friendly redneck liberal, the Mr. Lance Jackson. An LA port is set to operate around the clock to ease cargo logjams. The question is, and part of what we'll be looking at today, is it really going to make any difference? Now, it's hard to say. There's a lot that goes into getting a product from the great manufacturers of the East to all of us here in the West. And it's not a simple process, right? From that factory, wherever it's made, all the way to your home, there's a lot of moving parts, and the port is just one of those moving parts. We also are going to look at, though, the accelerating inflation and how that's spreading through the economy. How is that going to impact not just your holiday shopping, but also everything that you buy, and even things like your cost of living and wages? There's a lot to discuss, but before we dive in, Lance, what is the word of the day?
As you said, there are a lot of moving parts that have to make all of this work. So there are many intermediaries. Intermediaries, 6 syllables, intermediaries, a go-between of any medium, means, or agency in an intermediate form. As you pointed out, President Biden might be an intermediary. You know, he's stepping in here and trying to open up the ports and say, okay, we're going to get everybody to work. But then the truck drivers are a part of this. They're intermediaries. The cargo unloaders of the ship, are intermediaries. The forklift operators are intermediaries. The mechanics to keep all of the machines operating are intermediaries. So there are a lot of moving parts here that all have to work for this to make any difference. So it's not like, yay, everything's open and here we go and we're going to get all of our stuff just right now. Anytime you add a moving part to the process, it's just another possibility for something to go wrong. It's that glass half full, glass half empty thing again. It's great that we're going to try to push as many products through as possible, but there are a lot of different things that could happen to slow it down, so we can't necessarily count on it right now. We hope it works. It's a good try. Better to try and fail than never to have tried, but I think that's the process we're in.
The idea, right, is part of the reason this is happening. It wasn't that long ago. I mean, just 15, 10, even 5 years ago for some companies, that most of the philosophy was, right, manufacture a whole bunch of stuff, ship it, let it sit in a warehouse, and then disperse from the warehouse as needed, right? But we covered on The State of Us not that long ago that in recent years, some of that philosophy has changed, especially as more things are being ordered online and the need to push them out, right? And the changing demand. Something could be in demand one month and then out of demand the next month. So in a sort of new approach, the thinking has been, well, we don't manufacture as much as far out in advance, which is good for especially newer companies who may not be able to shell out, right, hundreds of millions to sit on inventory for months or years on end as it gets distributed. But when you have something like the pandemic where then the demand stops, so you quit placing orders and you don't have anything stocked up in the warehouse, then demand comes roaring back, right, all of a sudden. And when it comes roaring back, you have some startup lead time, right? You can't just turn it on one day and the next day have it in somebody's home. You have the time to manufacture it, then it's got to be shipped, right? A lot of times across the ocean, which itself is a process. I mean, it has to go from where it was made, right? Got to be loaded onto a truck, go from the truck, if it's lucky, directly to the port, but realistically, it's probably got to go to some distribution warehouse. Then from the distribution warehouse, it's going to be transferred right to the port. And then at the port, somebody has to unload it. Somebody has to load it on the ship. Once it's on the ship, it has to travel on the ship all the way to probably the port, LA's port, right? Once it's there, somebody has to unload it from the ship. It has to sit. Then it has to be loaded onto a truck. Then somebody on the truck has to drive it. Again, probably going to some kind of intermediary place before it goes directly to where it needs to go. So then somebody else has to load and unload it again. and then it has to be transported again, and then it arrives to the company, and then the company can ship it out to you. And then we have to go through, right, ships through the company to the last mile distributor, onto that truck. That truck has to drive to your house. That person has to take it off that truck and put it on your front porch. So it's and that you can't do that overnight, right? And you're like, well, but Amazon, right? The 1-day shipping. Well, yeah, but that's because they're shipping from a warehouse and all of that other stuff has already happened, right? They didn't make the product yesterday. They have it sitting in their distribution network and they're ready to push go. But that's the problem. I think here, a huge problem that we're running into is people are trying to ramp back up demand, and it's not like one company, right? It's everybody slowed down, and now everybody's trying to reignite at the same time. If this was just one company, Lance, we might have a different situation. But because you've got a huge segment of many parts of the economy simultaneously ramping back up, we're creating these log jams, right? That it's like, because the system worked before, right? But, well, it sort of worked before, but you didn't notice it as much, because if one company was having trouble, no big deal. If entire segments of the economy are having problems, you're going to notice it when all those intermediaries, or when just one of those intermediaries has a problem, right? All of a sudden, the whole chain falls apart.
Well, and it's when, you might say, well, why did we go to this? Why not store things in a warehouse? And why do I care that, well, one, right, businesses pay tax on their inventory at the end of the year or at their end of the fiscal year. So if they have less inventory, then they pay less in taxes, which means the business makes more money. It drives up then their profit margin, which means their company's worth more. So those invested in the stock market make more money from them. That means that if the company's saving money, then you get the product. That's you as the consumer get the product for less money. You have to pay less out of pocket. So before you start to bash and say, well, why do we go to that business model anywhere where we're going to make the parts or the supplies that we need next week the week before? Well, because that was a way to save money and everybody benefited. The companies benefited, the investors benefited, and most of all, we, the consumers, benefited because prices were kept low because they weren't paying all the taxes on the inventory they had, and they weren't also paying for all that warehouse space. All of a sudden, hey, I don't have to buy this warehouse, or I don't have to build this warehouse, or I don't have to. And so it all saved us money. But then you have the pandemic and we quit buying and we don't have money. And so then supplies backed up. And so everybody's like, yeah, well, we can't, no reason for us to make this stuff. We don't have any place to put it. And then all of a sudden, there was all the stimulus money out there and people, the pent up demand that you've heard about. All of us were like, well, I'm not going to buy this and I'm not going to buy that because I don't know what's going to happen next month or 6 months down the road. Well, now that things look good and we have stimulus money and we've made it through on the other side of the pandemic, at least for those of us that are still here, we have. Now it's like, well, now I'm going to buy this and I'm going to buy this. And when you multiply that times, 300 million people in the United States, all of a sudden, that's why we have this problem. And then you've all been reading and hearing about how there aren't enough workers. Well, that's part of this problem too. And I was sharing with Justin, I've been to my local supermarket the last 3 weeks, and the people who are loading the shelves when I'm at the store have gone 3 times back into the store's warehouse to look for products for me. And one time they had it and the other 2 times they didn't. They're busy loading the shelves and I'm taking stuff off of their loading cart. And so they can't even get the shelves stocked because people are taking it from their cart. And then they're even going back to check. And it's like, yeah, well, try Wednesday. The truck comes in Tuesday, try Wednesday. Maybe we'll have it on the shelves. And so now those of us that find that out, then we're all there on Wednesday. So if you go to the store on Thursday and Friday, too bad. Those of us that know that the store will be fully stocked on Wednesday are now getting the supplies before you get them. And there's nothing those people can do. They're working 8 hours a day, or longer, stocking shelves, yet you walk by and half of the potato chip aisle is empty, and 3/4 of the soft drink aisle is empty, and there are no dairy products in whatsoever. Well, it's because they're busy loading the bread and they're loading the meat and they're doing this. There aren't enough people to even get the shelves stocked, even if they get the supplies in.
Well, and a lot of that is items that are actually made in the United States and we're having problems with it, right? Though we're not even talking about, I mean, a lot of your food products, right? A lot of this stuff is manufactured domestically or produced domestically, and we're still having problems getting it, keeping up with the demand and getting things restocked.
Well, we're not even talking about going to Target or Walmart or places like that where, where a majority of the things are made in Southeast Asia and being shipped across.
And that's where our holiday shopping comes in, right? Probably most of the stuff that you're going to buy present-wise is going to be stuff that's not manufactured here domestically in the United States. So it has to make this journey that we've talked about, which is in many cases at least 3 times and sometimes 4 or 5 times longer than the domestic stuff, which is already a problem, right? And it itself is backing up the system. So think
of the technology pieces, right? I mean, most of the technology, the gaming systems and the new devices that you're going to want to buy yourself or your family members for Christmas, those are the items that you're talking about exactly, correct? I mean, those are many of the big ticket items, that
TVs,
Best
the game
Buy
systems,
and, all those places, all those electronic stores
phones
aren't going to have in there, right? Cameras, all of those types of things, speakers.
They always say, try to get your holiday shopping done early. But honestly, I mean, I know it's crazy because people are listening and it's October and it's like, I'm going to do my holiday shopping in October. But yes, I mean, if you really want to make sure that you get stuff, you should probably be looking now because it's going to be, my guess is, pretty hard. Because even though, right, and that's kind of the basis of how we started talking about this is the big news from last week that, the Port of Los Angeles is, going to operate 24/7. But Lance, I mean, you pointed out, right, they're really only adding about 6 hours a day that they're operating.
They're normally open from 8 to 5, and then they close for dinner from 5 to 6, and they're open from 6 to 3. So there's your 18 hours a day. So they're just picking up 6 hours a day. And the Port of Long Beach, south of LA, has been doing this for a month. And the director there said, it's really not doing any good because we're open for 90 hours, but we're only running at 60% capacity. So we have 40% of our spots for trucks are open, but we're not getting the trucks in here. So what good is it doing us to be open when we can't fill all of the parking spots? There aren't enough trucks in here for us to get loaded. And the truckers then saying, here's the intermediary part, right? That the truckers are then saying, well, but there aren't enough forklift operators to load our trucks. So we're pulling in here and we're sitting for 8 hours empty before you get us loaded. So why would I do that? I can make other deliveries. So again, you've got all these different moving parts that have to get in sync. But at least the big intermediary, President Biden, has stepped in and said, okay, the eyes of the U.S. government are now watching you. You need to get this done. And what is it that we can do to help you get it done? Because we, the U.S. government, are concerned about the at-home consumer.
So going to 24/7 is limited by the number of intermediaries that make the process happen, and the port itself obviously being the intermediary. So there are other obstacles, right, than just saying, oh, well, we're going to make the port operate longer. Now, the White House tells us that commitments from 6 different companies would allow 3,500 additional containers a week to move at night through the end of the year. Sounds great, but then the question is, even if they do that, right, even if they actually are able to make that target, well, we ship out all these trucks and they arrive at the warehouses. Is there anybody to unload them? And if they don't get unloaded, then the container is sitting, with stuff in it. And so now, all the way back at the beginning of the process, we have issues because we don't have the stuff to ship the things in, right? Because it's sitting, waiting to be unloaded at its final destination. So, and so on it goes, right? But there's more to talk about. What about inflation? Because that's a big area, right? The supply chain snarl is leading to higher prices, which is obviously driving up inflation. So the supply chain's not just about whether you're going to get your holiday gifts on time. It's also about what are you going to pay for everything in life. So what is happening with inflation? And is inflation going up mainly good or mainly bad? To find out, keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back. Intermediaries in the supply chain are causing a number of snarls, which ultimately are helping to drive up inflation. And that's because, right, when there's less product available, the people selling the product can afford to charge more for it, especially if Lance and I both want something and there's only one available, you can have a little bit of a bidding war, right? How high can I raise the price before one of them's no longer willing to pay for it?
Capitalism, supply and demand.
So, inflation. A lot of us have heard, right, about it, and we know that it's going up, but what exactly is going on? Well, the Labor Department told us last month that the Consumer Price Index, which is basically what measures what each of us pay every day for goods and services, it rose by 5.4% from a year earlier, and that's in unadjusted numbers. That is the same rate as in June and July as the economy reopened, and it's slightly higher than in August of last year. The so-called core price index, which excludes the often volatile categories of food and energy in September, it climbed 4% from a year earlier. So even if you exclude, right, things like food and energy, you're still talking about a 4% increase.
Even if you take out the basic necessities, there's still quite an increase.
And those have been historically they're volatile, right? But they've been extra volatile lately because of what Lance was talking about. You know, you go in and you have this rush on a product. I mean, I observed it. You know, I didn't even really know it had happened until somebody mentioned it the other day, but raspberries, right? That's a big one locally. And you're saying, you know, well, it went from whatever, you know, $1.99 for your little carton to $2.99. Okay, well, that $1 doesn't seem like a lot more that you're paying, but the percentage of inflation on the raspberries is huge.
Well, I went to one of my local eateries. Hadn't been there in about 4 or 5 months, and in the big city. I have to go to the big city here because we live out in the boonies. But I went to one of my local eateries last night, and the main product, the Coney dog that they sell, the price was up 15% from the last time I went to the store. And went to the store and bought some. And it was like, wow, I spent, you know, typical meal that that my wife and I get to take home. I spent an additional 25% on that meal last night than what we had normally spent. And that was without getting drinks. And normally when we eat in the restaurant, I get drinks. But again, that's the price of doing business right now, you know, because as it said on their door, our prices are up because the cost of doing business is higher. And there may be some items that we can't sell you that are on our menu because we can't get a hold of them. 2 stores down, though, they were closed. And the sign on their door said, sorry, we're closed because we can't get any workers. So, do you complain about the rise in prices or the fact that you can't get it because there aren't enough workers for the store to even be open?
You complain about both, I think.
Oh, okay.
Right? Because we're good at that.
But wait a minute. And, here's where this is the thing. It's like we just did this story where wages over this time period are up 4.6%. But you said that inflation is up over 5%.
5.4%.
So wages, even though wages are up, they're not keeping up with inflation.
And spending, and this is a crucial factor, right, in determining inflation. Consumer spending jumped 11.9% in the second quarter.
Well, so if you're in business and you raise prices, but you're getting 11% more business, well, you're not going to stop raising prices because people are still are buying.
They're willing to pay the price that you're asking.
Right.
Because like you just said, they can go next door, but next door might not even be open because we don't have anybody to
I
order.
sat in line last night. So everybody else, like I said, prices were up, 15, 20, 30% on products. Yet there was a line of us in the drive-thru waiting to pick up our orders. Can't fault the business, can you?
Well, no. I mean, and people are quick to write this whole, well, if people would go work. And yes, as we've talked about before, there is a truth to that. But just the other day, front page of the Wall Street Journal, right? There's still about 10 million job openings available. And even if you put everybody to work who isn't working right now, you still have about 3 million open positions. So it's a simple math equation, right? Of I need 10 million, I have 7 million, I am short 3 million, right? And it's not that simple, because as we've talked about, you can't just put those 7 million people into 7 million of the available jobs, because it doesn't work.
Are
that
those
way.
people looking for work where the jobs are available? I mean,
and are they qualified?
in the
they
city,
can look all they want, right? But you can't hire Lance tomorrow to do knee surgery, because he's not qualified to do that. So even if he's looking, and even if he wants to do knee surgery, we're not going to pay him to do knee surgery, or at least not full price. So,
but if Amazon or UPS are looking for people, if we don't have a place that I'm willing to drive to, it's not close locally, I'm not there. So I have to live in the area where they're looking for those people.
Exactly. So, but even if you could, right, you're still short 3 million. So there's this clear, people are just kind of throwing their hands up and, well, what do we do?
Okay. So what do you do?
What do we do?
Well, you raise your wages, right? And we've seen that around here. A lot of signs for $13 an hour. There's a big story where Walmart just went from 11 to 12, which still puts them behind Target at 15. But businesses are having to fight over the same workers, so they're offering more money. Well, if they're paying more money for the workers so that they can stay open to deliver the products you want, then they have to raise their prices, hence inflation, right? There are all those little intermediary pieces that affect the final outcome. So for you to get your product, they have to pay more to get the workers, which means they have to increase the price on that product if they can get it, so that they can get it in your hands. So, but since we all have that stimulus money, we're not worried about it. We're just going out there and spending, hence your 11% increase in consumer spending.
And I put it out there because, yes, I think you all know from listening to the episode that raising wages, we believe, is an answer to a lot of different problems. It's not the only answer, right? Because there's other issues. And that's part of what inflation does a good job of showing us where there are already pain points that maybe we were ignoring. But then when all of a sudden everything is costing more money, it becomes harder to ignore, right? One of those areas is the worker issue. I think not everybody, but a lot of people forget that Lance and I, right, and the conference board and other people were raising the alarm bell on the labor shortage before COVID hit. And then COVID hit, and it's like we all thought, well, now there won't be a labor shortage. And here we are, right? And there's still that problem because there just aren't enough human beings, that can do the given jobs that need to be done to do the jobs. And this is one of those where I think it's critical that people understand the danger of that, right? Inflation is going up, demand is going up, spending is going up. And at the moment, we don't have the people to sustain that. So what happens is you have businesses that may very well, right? The demand is there. They would be happy to pay the people, but they go out of business simply because they can't get the labor necessary to operate. And what an awful reason to have an economic recession, right? Which is that we can't meet the demand for what's being asked. Even if birth rates start to improve immediately, we're not going to feel the effects of that for at least 18 to 20 years, right?
Well, not to go down the rabbit hole, but we know the answer, right?
Well, that's what I'm getting at. I'm hoping our listeners are getting there on their own, right? Yes, improving birth rates is a long-term option, but we've also talked about that comes with its own problems, right? Because having more people in the country also costs more money, and on and on it goes. So the only really viable solution is we have to find more human beings, right? And if there aren't enough human beings in this country, then the only option is to allow human beings from other countries to come in to do the jobs, right?
That's how you fill.
That's how you
fill the void quickly.
You fill the void.
That's right.
So,
well, and historically, that's what's happened in the past. We went from, well, we'll let women work, we'll let minorities work in jobs, and that, and we've done that now. Okay. And we've even had where we allowed immigrants in and brought immigrants in to work. Right. And those have been and I hope you're still listening, folks. If you study your history, that's when the greatest economic growth has happened in this country, is when we've had the immigrants coming into the country, because it increased the number of workers, which means we could increase products, we increased business, and there was more money available. So for all of the bad press that has been said about immigration, when you look at the economy of the United States, the periods of growth that we've had in the last 240 years have usually been preceded by an increase in the number of people coming into the country.
And the increase in the number of people coming in is because this isn't the first time that we've faced an issue like this, where demand was outpacing our ability to provide it, right? And the equation is, again, simple math equation, right? We are short at least 3 million people. Now, the other thing I want to point out here, because I think this is essential, you and I have talked a lot about the unemployment number and why it's misleading, right? We may very well have enough physical human bodies in this country to do the jobs that need to be done. Again, are they qualified? Are they even looking for work? There are 7 million people who don't have a job who are trying to find a job.
I'm personally am not part of the unemployment rate. I don't have a job, but I'm not looking for a job.
Exactly. So Lance doesn't get counted in that, right? Same thing with, now Lance is retired, so, even a little bit different category who are not counted in that number. But as we see, Lance is a perfect example, right? Of there are a lot of people who quote unquote retired from their career who are now out mowing lawns or greeting people at Walmart or bagging groceries or doing whatever because they know they can go make money at it because it's like, hey, people are willing to pay. I'm not ready to be done working. So they're going back to work. But that's part of why, as we've talked about, the unemployment numbers kind of a weird thing. And it's difficult too, because as people like that go back into the workforce, the question is, do they actually end up preventing some of those people who gave up looking for work from going to look for work because they fill some of the entry-level style jobs that other people may have taken? Again, the data and the research isn't really there for us to make a lot of great conclusions on that, other than that we know there are literally millions and millions of people who are of working age, right, who are not retired, who are not part of the group of people looking for work. And that, I think, it would be a disservice if we didn't mention that must also be addressed, right? Yes, we could let more people into the country to work. And yes, we should, and maybe this is in the reverse order. The first thing is, right, we should figure out how do we get these people that have decided to give up on work to say, no, we need you to take a chance on work, right? And there's not enough of those people either. So then we also need, right, to bring in, to allow enough people to come in to fill the remaining jobs. Because if not, economic recession, right? That's the only way this ends is that if we don't do something else to satisfy the issue. Again, if you're an economist out there, send us an email, podcast@thestateofus.org. Send us an email and let us know the other possible end scenario, but I don't see one. So we'll keep talking about this. What do we do about the inflation problem and your holiday shopping? Will it all come to pass, or are we headed for disaster? Find out, keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. The intermediaries in the economy, Lance, there's a lot of them. In fairness, that's the attempt here, right? By moving the ports to 24/7, you're trying to alleviate one of the many problems. But the other problem, which is what we just left off talking about, is just humans, right? Just not enough human beings to do the various jobs that need to be done.
Well, you got to, one place we can look is to the intermediary of the Federal Reserve, right? That's an intermediary who can step in. And that's why they exist, right? Is to step in and try to do things.
I've heard though, right? What I've heard coming from them is that we might be looking at interest rates actually going back up again.
Right. But because you're trying to control inflation. I don't know. I just think that it's an interesting scenario in that there isn't an easy answer, because what people don't understand, we're jumping from crisis to crisis. And I think what we're trying to point out today is there's an intermingling of these crises, that they are occurring because of this is part of the process. It's like, well, once we get COVID under control, which, you can debate whether we do or not, but, we obviously have reopened the economy to some point. Whether it's too soon or not is another question for debate. But as you do that, then you put all the pressure on in this other area of things. And then it's like, well, because of the pandemic, we've done shows on this. Do I want to work anymore? It wasn't too bad to be able to stay home and do these things. If you have another way to earn money or another wage earner in the home. And so, like you said, you have to entice people. You said before, what's the crisis with Chris? Well, maybe you don't get what you want. You don't get what you're looking for. For me, that's not a tough thing. But in our instant gratification society that we live in now, that's going to cause a problem for some people. They don't want to wait. I have to wait 5 minutes to get my food. Well, why don't you cook a meal at home? It takes an hour.
Old man rant.
I'm not waiting an hour. Rah, rah, rah. Yeah, old man rant. But you know what? Patience is a virtue. That's what I always heard. So why don't we just have some patience?
I think we should bring in your wife and see.
Why don't we work hard and have some patience? See if she calls you somebody
of patience. I'd just be interested to hear her take on the patience skills. But I think that happens a lot on this show, right? You and I are always telling people, you need to work less, right? You got to do less of this and less of that. And it's like, here's the 80-hour work week. Shh, don't tell anybody. But I mean, in fairness, the other thing is, will it say you don't want to work?
Well, you and I can't work enough for everybody else. That's we're holding up our end plus some.
Yeah, come on, people, get out there. We're doing everything we can, and it's not enough. So, but I was thinking as you were talking about, do I even want to work, right? For the people that could, but don't have to. I don't know. I mean, if inflation doesn't get checked, right? Can you afford to stay retired? Because retirement, right? The whole notion of it with most companies and most retirements is based on an assumed level of inflation. And if inflation rises above that, you start to get into, is what you're getting in retirement income actually able to, to adjust for that?
With inflation where it is, there are some automatic kick-ins with
like Social Security
where benefits will be increased. But if benefits are going to increase, then your Social Security tax that's coming out of your check, if you are a worker, is also going to increase. And there are some automatic kick-in numbers that we're approaching right now with inflation. So all of a sudden, you're one of those people that are working, and we appreciate you and glad that you're looking for work and have a desire to work. But you could see less in your paycheck, because with this inflation, we could see a rise in Social Security taxes.
I think the other thing that's important to point out is we could kind of invalidate the whole episode here, Lance, by simply saying what some economists have said, which is just the idea that there are literally trillions of U.S. government dollars coursing through the economy. And in a year or two, when those work themselves out of the system, everything's going to go back to, quote unquote, relative norm in terms of prices and inflation, because what we're experiencing right now is a pandemic that's not really over, but is, hopefully, right, trending in that direction. And the back end of the stimulus that was forced into the economy, people are back out there, right? Things are reopening and people are spending money. Plus they have more money to spend. There is more money in the economy. Businesses have access to cheap capital. So you have a perfect storm occurrence here of people want to go out and do stuff because they haven't been doing stuff. They want to go buy things that they haven't been buying. The supply chain's unable to fulfill said demand, and businesses have access to cheap capital, which is letting them expand, which is offering people who are eager to buy things all new kinds of options.
What you're saying is that within 12 months, all of that's going to work itself out and we're going to be back to square one.
It's another argument. The thing that I think the biggest problem with that argument in my mind is the labor shortage component, right? I think that a lot of that argument, it could be very valid, and that part of what we're feeling is the effect of government stimulus, right?
We're feeling the pinch now.
Yeah.
Right. The ebb and flow.
Yeah, because here, we kind of petered along, and now, boom, that we hit the accelerator and we're rocketing up. But that's going to taper off, and when it tapers off, we're going to be left with what we're talking about right now, which is what we were talking about before COVID hit and inflation went skyrocketing, which is the labor shortage. That, in my mind, is still the biggest obstacle long-term to your holiday shopping and inflation is just the labor shortage. Some of these other components we've talked about, I think that there's a good case to be made, but nobody really knows, right? I mean, we're all just kind of guessing here and hoping that we get it right. There's a good case to be made that a lot of that stuff's going to self-correct as everything starts to slowly transition back to kind of where it was. The thing that's not just going to magically change overnight is jobs relative to workers, right? Without some other major world event, like if there was like another economic recession or something, then yeah, you could have a lot of people that get put out of work and everything flips the other way.
That's why we're having this conversation, is because we don't know. We can look at the historical data, we can look at the current data, and then we're talking about it. And we need you to partake, because that's where change is made and where policy gets made and how we make this a better place. And all that's part of our mission here at True Chat, to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And I don't think I was very good at using intermediary. I think Justin wins today in a landslide. We'll see what his numbers say. But as you're talking to your family and friends, tell them you need to listen to this show. It's a great way to stay up on what's going on, and it's stimulating conversation and getting you to think. And they can find us on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found.
I have our final here. I see you front loaded. You got a lot right at you racked up like 5 in the first 30 seconds. So
okay.
You were yeah, that initial opening there where you're like, man, there's this intermediary and that intermediary and this intermediary and that intermediary. And see, do I get to count all 4 of them intermediaries? I don't know. But if we count those as part of the goal, I had it at 10-9 with me just by 1. So I don't know. You're front loaded there. You really hit me hard. I had to really try to make up for that.
I hit a grand slam in the first inning, and then my offense went dead, to use the baseball analogy.
Trickled in the rest of the game. So, and see, I just played,
you just plugged away. You played small ball and got one run a game, right? Or 1 run an inning. You got the sacrifice fly, the stolen base, the pass ball, and you ended up winning 10-9 in a barn burner.
You hit the grand slam, and then we're out of breath by the time you made it to home base. The rest of the game was...
That's being old. I can't run.
That's right.
I got to hit a home run and jog around the bases.
New episodes, right? Tuesdays and Thursdays as the podcast, and those are available first thing in the morning. Of course, we're also heard in select talk radio markets around the country, so be sure to check that local AM or FM station and see if they carry our program. For the State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to our producer, Bradley Butch, and thank you all, our audience, for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.